Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Betting Pros College Football Look Ahead. I'm Thomas Viola, and joining me for the next 13 weeks of collegiate football action, none other than the God of Thunder himself from the land of 1,000 lakes. Ladies and gentlemen, Thor Nystrom. Thor, how's it going?
It's going really well, Thomas. Yesterday, obviously, college football kicked off. The season kicked off, and today is my birthday. And now we get to dive into what is a full week one card. So absolutely thrilled and good to be with you.
Oh, well, happy birthday, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I am so excited to spend the next 13 weeks and change breaking down these college football slates with you. We're going to be coming at you guys here each and every week with Thor's look-ahead lines, talking about his favorite games, talking about some of the biggest games, everything you need to know to break down this week's college football slate. And we start off here, of course, with week one. And Thor, the first game that I have up to talk with you about here, I want to talk about Louisiana-Monroe versus Texas, because it's not going to be a powerhouse battle, but you know, everybody always asks every year, is Texas back? And in this game, they are 38.5-point favorites as the line stands right now. You think that there's a slight discrepancy there, but more so what I want to ask you here leading off, how do you approach betting games like this where you have such a monster point spread? Because as we have non-conference play to start the year, you're going to see some of these games between powerhouse teams taking on small teams, and you're going to see monster spreads of 30, 35, even 40 points like this in these games. How do you approach betting a game like this?
Yeah, it's sort of like, you know, someone who shops online a lot and they start to just look for the coupons and the values. Whatever line I'm looking at, I'm always, you know, whether it's a big spread or a small spread, I'm just looking for the biggest, what I perceive to be the biggest, you know, value overlay in my advantage. A lot of times that is not on the big spreads, like especially laying the points with a favorite. I almost never do that in college football with a favorite over, say, 25 points. There will be spots where I'll pick and choose to take the points with the heavy underdog, specifically in instances where I don't think the favorite is either motivated to lay a number on them, or they want to get out of there quicker and just get the clock rolling and stuff like that. Or if there's an indication that they're going to yank the starters earlier than you might think and get into the backup, stuff like that. Or if the underdog is just super undervalued by the market. In this case, I don't really see that. I'm a little bit higher on Texas than the market is, but I would also, going to the very bottom of the barrel, I also think I'm just a bit higher on UL-Monroe probably than the market. UL-Monroe got back their old offensive coordinator, Matt Lubick, over the offseason. They had tried to roll it forward with Rich Rodriguez these last couple of years as their offensive coordinator. I don't know what has happened to Rich Rodriguez since he left West Virginia. He failed as a head coach a couple different times, and now his offenses are not working either as an offensive coordinator. But Matt Lubick is a guy who, going back 3-4 years, the last time that UL-Monroe was interesting, when they had like an offense that could actually score, that's when Matt Lubick was their offensive coordinator. So getting him back, I think, is going to be big there. But just as far as this game, you know, my number on it is pretty close to what the Vegas spread is. Like you said, Longhorns are favored by 38.5. My number on it is Longhorns by 39.1. So I'm not showing a ton of value there. For me, this is going to be more of an informational game to get my eyes on Quinn Ewers. We've never seen Quinn Ewers with the bullets flying during an FBS game, college football game. That's what I'm most interested to see. Is that arm for real, like people have been saying? Is he, a young Matt Stafford, like some have claimed? I want to get my eyes on him. We're not going to get a referendum on him this week playing UL-Monroe, but the next week they play Alabama. So that's why we want to get the information on UT this week.
I am very much looking forward to that Alabama game. A Texas win, and suddenly even I'm here saying they might indeed be back. I don't think it's probably going to happen, but we will see, and we will see how this week plays out first. But one of the things that you just touched on there is value. And some people make the common mistake, you especially see it in gambling social media all the time, is they look at a number and they say, oh, this is 3-1, therefore it has value. That's not what value means. Value means that you think you are getting a number that is significantly better than what that number should be. Not necessarily what it is. It has nothing to do with the payout you're actually getting. And we're going to focus a lot on that in how we go over some of these games here over the course of the next 13 weeks. And one of the biggest games for you when it comes to value on the board right now is Louisiana Tech versus Missouri this week. The spread is 19 points, and you think that number is just flat out wrong.
I do. Yeah. My number on that is Missouri by 11.4. So my overlay on it is 7.6 points in favor of Louisiana Tech, the underdog. You have a couple different things going on here. Missouri lost a lot over the season. They lost their starting quarterback. They lost some other guys. They're going with a bunch of young guys on offense, both at the quarterback position. Also, throughout the two deep, like Luther Burden, the 5-star receiver who's coming in, a true freshman, he's going to get pounded with targets like right from the jump and stuff like that. Drinkowitz has done a decent job of adding talent. They're just not there yet. This is going to be a very young two deep that Missouri has this coming season. We'll see if Drinkowitz can survive for a couple more years to be able to see this through. But this is not going to be the team where that jumps up. I don't think that Missouri is going to make a bowl game this year. Meanwhile, on the Louisiana Tech side, I honestly think the market is a little bit too low on them. They had a coaching change over the offseason. They bring in Sonny Cumbie. I think that Cumbie has a chance to get that system off the ground pretty quickly. He brought in 2 veteran quarterbacks that he had coached at his previous 2 stops, like these 5th-year senior guys who both are sort of students of the air raid. So it looks like Matt Downing is going to be the starter there. He knows how to run that system. So it's not like there's going to be something lost in translation or the players are going to take longer to acclimate to the new coaching staff like you see in some other circumstances. Louisiana Tech also has a surprisingly deep receiving core for a G5 team that had a win total of like 4.5 in Vegas. I think the Louisiana Tech has more talent than is perceived. And I think that the schematic changes that were brought to them over the summer, that's going to tick the team up. So I think these two teams are, going back to your point about the value, I think these two teams are closer in reality than the perception that this line is trying to forward.
Now, these two teams you think are a lot closer, but flipping the script the other way, teams that you think are a lot further apart than books are currently putting out, Western Michigan and Michigan State. You like the Sparties laying 20 here. You think that number is about 10 points too few.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And, obviously Kenneth Walker is gone, right? And so I think, the market has shifted way down on Michigan State, but they did a decent job of reloading. And it's not like, now they're just going to devolve into the team that they were the year before. They brought in a couple starting caliber P5 running backs, one of whom was the Pac-12 Player of the Year a couple of years ago, Broussard. And then they got this kid Berger from Wisconsin, just across the way in the Big Ten. Their quarterback also should be really solid. I mean, he's absolutely above average starter for the Big Ten in Peyton Thorne. And they have receivers and I think what you're going to see this year is a bit more passing out of them. I think the defense could also be a little bit better. But this play is as much against Western. In fact, it's probably more against Western Michigan than it is for Michigan State. Western Michigan the past couple years has been dangerous because you had Caleb Ellaby throwing to Sky Moore. Those guys are gone now in the NFL, and they weren't the only people that Western Michigan lost. They sort of cratered out the two deep. A lot of new starters on that team. I think it's going to take Western Michigan longer to sort of get their sea legs under them. And I also don't think we're going to see the same quality of Western Michigan that we've seen the last couple of years. So this game, the market's looking at this more competitive again, because I think they're looking at Michigan State. Maybe they're going to be somewhere between where they were the last couple of years, and Western Michigan is going to be who they've been. I just don't think that that's actually the case.
Now, a team in orange and blue with Tommy DeVito at quarterback actually impressed this last Saturday, and I am very, very sad that it was no longer my orange. But Illinois, the Fighting Illini, now go on to face the Hoosiers of Indiana. And this line is at Indiana minus 3.5. And you're saying the book is completely wrong. This should be 3 points going the other way.
Yeah, I think the book's wrong on this. And by the way, I did think of you yesterday when I was watching Illinois and Wyoming. And DeVito actually looked pretty good. And he also, by the way, after the game, he sort of took a little bit of a shot at Syracuse. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but DeVito was telling reporters, he's like, I didn't get sacked today. When's the last time you could say that about one of my games? And it's like, wow, like the Syracuse offensive line's watching it. Like, we're catching strays out here. We weren't even playing today.
To be fair, fully deserved. They deserved that shot. The protection for him was horrible, and I'm glad to see him succeeding somewhere. I'll give him that shot.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it definitely was fair. And, with this team, I think both the things you were encouraged about the Wyoming game, DeVito's performance, and then also, to his point, we knew that their offensive line was the mauling, run game, sort of a thing. Like they averaged 320 pounds per starter across the 5 line spots. Illinois does. You didn't know how much it would translate to pass pro. In recent years, or I guess last year would be the analogous one, their pass protection was not as good. So the fact that it was in the first game, now you could say, it's just Wyoming. You toss that out. Well, Craig Bull's a pretty good defensive coach. So, the fact that Wyoming's offense stinks, that just is what it is. But Wyoming typically is better on defense. So I like the performance on both of those sides. And it does seem like Illinois does not have to play the one way that they played last year. I can't get fully on board with the idea that Brett Bielema is going to go up tempo, like in all the games like he was promising. But whereas last year they played at a pace so slow that it was like paint drying. Now you can start to vary the tempos a little bit as situations dictate, which is a good thing for Illinois. And then as far as this game, like we were saying, I just think that the spread is off. And it's what's weird to me is, and we were even looking over this before the show where I had to go back and double check the spread that I had inputted for this game to make sure that the Vegas spread, it was the correct team that was favored. Because I really feel like the correct line on this game, it's Illinois -3 or -3.5. Illinois brought back most of the guys from last season's team that went 5-7 and had a series of close losses. Like, it was like, of those 7 games, it was like 4 or 5 of them were single digit losses. Whereas on the other side with Indiana, they stunk last year and they lost a whole bunch of guys like Michael Penix, the quarterback. And he had been injured for a lot of last year, but the offense devolved into Hades land without him. Right. And now you bring in Connor Bazelak. We were just talking about Missouri. They brought him in as their quarterback, but they don't appear to have a running game again. It looks like they're going to go with Sean Shivers this year, who they signed from Auburn, just sort of like last year. They had gone with Stephen Carr, who they'd signed from USC. Carr didn't really add an explosive element to the offense. I don't think that Shivers is going to add, another dimension that concerns defenses. And Tom Allen, the other issue for him is a couple of years ago during the COVID season, where they had that really solid season for a little bit, it looked like the Hoosiers could make the Big Ten title games, sort of under fluky circumstances, but still. They had that really, really solid defense, and they sent like 4 guys to the NFL. They were all these kids from Florida that Tom Allen had discovered like under the radar, like these mid 3 stars that he'd sort of like, found them and then polished them, whatever. What we've seen these last couple of years is not as much of that. He has not been finding the steals and then polishing them up. Indiana's got to get back to that, or else they're going to devolve right back into the drain. And as a Kansas fan, I can speak to this personally, because when Kansas was good, it was when Mark Mangino was finding 3 stars from around the country who've been overlooked for one reason or another. Todd Reesing, for a quarterback, 5'10", 190 pounds. He came from Austin, Todd Reesing did. Texas didn't want anything to do with him because of his size. He goes to Kansas, he starts 4 years, wins an Orange Bowl. Aqib Talib was another one. He was like super raw, whatever. It's the same thing here with Indiana. They got to get the player development back and the identification back, the scouting, and then the development should sort of go with that. But I think identifying the recruits is something they've been missing in recent years.
Now, a game, it's week 1, but it's college football. There are still must-win games, and one that is absolutely must-win here for Oregon, going up against Georgia. They are getting 17.5 points in this game. We saw them pull off an upset over Ohio State last year, and to be quite frank, especially in the Pac-12, if you want any chance at the college football playoff, Oregon has to win this game. You actually like them a little bit more than the books, though. 17.5 is their line. The adjusted Thor line closer to 11.
It is, yeah. So I do see some value on Oregon in this game. I am a little bit surprised that Vegas is giving Georgia this much respect. Like, certainly I expected Georgia to be a double-digit favorite. Like, no problem there. But 17.5, you have gone now over several key thresholds after you just lost a historic amount of talent to the NFL. Was it 5 first-round defenders and 10 kids overall or whatever it was. They lost a couple running backs and, the whole thing, Pickens, et cetera, et cetera. Of course they're going to reload. They still have one of the nation's 1, 2, or 3 best defenses, however you want to parse that in the preseason. Definitely might still be the best. We'll see about that. And the offense, they still certainly have pieces. Obviously, Stetson Bennett is back. The running back room is going to be reloaded, because last year they were playing 4 guys. This year they can either just cut it to 2 because the 2 left, or they're bringing in all these stud freshmen, the sophomores from last year, whatever. You can tick that back up. And then what's going to be really interesting about their offense this year is they're going to have the best tight end room that we've seen in college football since Iowa had T.J. Hawkinson and Noah Fant. Because you got Brock Bowers, who last year, may have been the best tight end in college football, especially with Mayer being on again, off again, hurt with Notre Dame. You could probably say that about Bowers. Then you're getting Eric Gilbert, who incredibly, Georgia won the title last year without him after signing him from LSU. And so you add him to that. Eric Gilbert's the closest thing that college football has seen to Kyle Pitts since Kyle Pitts left. Eric Gilbert is the replacement for George Pickens. It's not one of the receivers on Georgia's 2 deep. It's Eric Gilbert. He is the guy that is going to be stretching the field. And then they have a third NFL tight end on their team in Darnell Washington, who is this jumbo, essentially a third offensive tackle on the field at all times. Not as much of a receiver, but for that downhill running game, it's just devastating. So they got a lot of stuff going on there. Whereas with Oregon, what makes this matchup so fascinating is the architect of that defense, or the understudy to the architect, or however you want to say that, with Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, the defensive coordinator for Georgia last year. He goes to Oregon over the offseason. They hire him to replace Mario Cristobal, who of course had gone back to Miami. So you bring in Lanning, his first game in Oregon now, he's got to travel down to face Georgia, the school he just left, in Atlanta, in this huge marquee, showcase game where all of the eyes of college football are going to be on them. And he's going to war with Bo Nix, who has been one of the most, the last 2+ years was like the most maligned SEC quarterback. So you're going to war with Bo Nix against what still should be this devastating defense. It's going to be really interesting to see the way that plays out. But I think the rest of Oregon's skill talent is probably better than people think. Like they lost Travis Dye to USC. I actually don't care about that, even though I think Dye is pretty good, because Byron Cardwell, who was the backup last year, might be better. He's certainly more explosive. And they have a whole bunch of ballyhooed freshmen and sophomores behind him. So their running back room is still fine. They still have plenty of talent there. I do like, Oregon to probably keep this one within the spread, but this is one that I'm going to be studying a lot more this week. And I'm also going to be paying very close attention to the comments coming both out of the Oregon camp with Dan Lanning and then also the Georgia camp with Kirby Smart, his former mentor.
Now, the next game up here is one with a very, very big name brand that everybody is familiar with. We have Rice, the team that everybody loves to love, going up against this small school in Southern California, University of Southern California. I don't know. 34.5 points is the line here for USC. And you think that line is just a touch off?
I do. Yeah. My line on that one is USC minus 28.5. So I guess I have a 6-point discrepancy on that. This one is a pure and simple tax. If you're going to bet on USC and lay the points in this game, you are paying a 6-point tax to bet on the Trojans. And, most of that is from the excitement over the offseason, bringing in Lincoln Riley, bringing in Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Travis Dye, the whole Jordan Addison, the Biletnikoff winner, the whole thing. There's been obviously a ton of excitement there. Me and my numbers specifically, because that's what we're talking about, we're high on USC and, in relation to what they have been. In fact, they were tied for the highest jump in my power ratings from the end of last year to the start of this year. They jumped up 39 spots. So it's not that my system is too low on USC. I dragged them up about as far as you can from a year-over-year proposition. But people got to keep in mind USC's roster, and if you add the changes between a coaching staff and a roster and a two deep year over year, USC is going through one of the biggest changes that we've ever seen for a team that is considered a title contender. I think that's fair to say. There's some people do, at least a conference title contender in the Power Five. We haven't really seen a seismic roster change like this for a team that the people are still confident in. So that one is just too many points for me to lay, even though obviously I don't really love Rice. Although Mike Bloomgren, the former Stanford offensive coordinator, he was the offensive coordinator when McCaffrey was there. He's been there long enough now where at least his systems are in place, and he's doing a lot of that same stuff that he used to do under David Shaw, by the way, when Stanford was good. I know a lot of people out there might not remember this because Stanford stunk the last several years, sort of coincided with Bloomgren leaving. But what he wants to do is shorten the game. So those two guys, Riley and Bloomgren, are going to have opposite strategies in this game. Bloomgren's will work if USC's defense has not jumped up. USC's defense changed just as much as its offense. It's just it didn't get the star caliber players on defense. So that's the one part of that team where there's the open questions about it. I've been reading a lot of quotes. I've been just fascinated by specifically the defense, because I believe that the USC's offense is just going to be awesome from the jump, especially because there was so much continuity, moving over there. The defense is more interesting to me. And so I've been looking up like quotes from Alex Grinch and the different position coaches and stuff. Publicly, they sound pessimistic about the Trojans' defense's progress to this point. At least those are the comments that they're forwarding to the media. Now, you might be trying to send a message to your players and be like, you guys are not hot. I didn't want to swear, but you're not, the huge deal. Don't read the newspaper clippings before we've even had a chance to play a game. Or if that's like a legitimate concern that they're not really gelling right now, and you have all these moving parts and they're still looking for people to actually win starting jobs and stuff like that. But if right now, I would be betting Rice plus those points. It's just too many points.
Now, another team that you want to talk about here, TCU versus Colorado. The line is 10.5 right now in favor of Texas Christian, and you think that's not enough points?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, my adjusted line on that one is
15.2.
15.2. Yeah, I got a difference of almost 5 points on that line. This is an example of a week one game where the favorite, I'm higher on them than the market. Over the summer, I was doing like my win totals, and doing the research for stuff like that, team by team. And I could tell that I was higher on USC than the market for reasons I'll get into in a second. And I am definitely lower on Colorado than the market. And it's not like the market is super high on Colorado, but the win total on Colorado was like 3.5 for most of the summer at most books. Some books now it has gone down to 3. But I think that they're going to go 1-11, and I do not believe that Carl Durrell is going to survive the fall. Colorado is going to be very, very bad this year. We were just talking about USC, how they're going to, they're having this historic roster remake and coaching staff, remodeling and stuff like that, and how that's going to lead to this jump up. Colorado is sort of the opposite, although they did keep the coaching staff mostly intact. But with the roster, you had this offseason of unprecedented player movement. And this is something, by the way, that Nick Saban had warned college football about a couple of years ago. If you lift the restrictions on transfers, if you just lift it up, Nick Saban told us, I promise you, it is not going to help the bad teams. It is going to help the halves, right? Like they're just going to start picking the players off the bad rosters. And we've sort of started to already see that. Like, it sucks that Saban's sort of always right with stuff like this. But Carl Durrell saw it right, close up, His roster, they were picking guys off. I mean, they didn't have the most stars, but anyone that someone wanted off of Colorado, they were just going in there. By the way, Lincoln got Brendan Rice. He might have gotten one other guy from Colorado as well, but wasn't the only coach that was going in there. They're picking guys off. So Karl Dorrell had to turn around. He had to go heavily into the transfer portal, essentially just to replace guys on the way out. It's like this revolving door at Colorado where he's like, oh man, one of my receivers just left. We got to go into the portal. Now we're signing RJ Sneed, who was, very disappointing at Baylor last year to replace Rice. And, and there was all these other different ones where it's like a 1-for-1, but every single time you were getting worse. Do you remember that movie Multiplicity with Michael Keaton? And it's like, he's making copies of himself, but every time he makes a copy, it gets worse and worse and worse. And by the seventh time he makes himself, it's like, a super stupid version of Michael Keaton. It was sort of like that with the Colorado at this thing. Anyway, their roster now, it's like, the 3 times 4 multiplicities beyond even what it was at the end of last year. You do have a little bit of continuity, but it's not very like they got the quarterback back, but he's not very good. And the defense was picked apart too. So I don't love them. And then on the other side, the reason that I like TCU more than the market is the Gary Patterson era. Obviously the way that it ended was very unfortunate, and it was sort of like a tire fire there at the end. Their defense, which for a decade plus had been awesome, last year was awful. Like the wheels fell off. It was terrible. Like they gave up like 12 points more per game than they had from the year before. And the other thing was they couldn't pass because Max Duggan, their quarterback, he's this strapping dual threat who has a good arm, but his accuracy is awful. Like it's like Nuclear Luge. For Bull Durham, he's like hitting people in the stands and stuff like that. So even though TCU could run the ball last year, they ran it really well. Their offense was horribly inefficient because of the accuracy issues of Duggan and then the turnovers that came out of Duggan's inaccuracy. And then meanwhile, every time you put your defense in a bad position, it was just a matador allowing the opposing offense to score. Now you bring in a new coaching staff. Sonny Dykes has come in, famous guru of the air raid. He addresses and some of the additions and returning addresses the very specific weaknesses that last year's team had. Your primary one was the passing game. Now you're going from Max Duggan, the accuracy averse Max Duggan, to where they're more Chandler Morris, the guy who had started out last year as the backup, but he took over at the very end and was very impressive. This kid was a 4-star recruit. He is your more, at least from a collegiate perspective, your more prototypical pocket passing type passer, and he likes the field spread. He's a perfect fit for the air raid offense. TCU has plenty of weapons, like literally stocked with them, which is why it was so unfortunate that Duggan was so inaccurate. They have one of the best receivers in the nation in Quentin Johnston, and even the second, third, fourth are pretty solid in comparison to like other teams. So you're talking about top 20 receiving core, maybe top 15 in the entire nation. And then the running back room should be pretty solid too. But this year they're going to be catching a lot of passes. Zach Evans left. Maybe that's a part of the reason why the market was a little bit lower. He was the 5-star running back that they'd had. He had a lot of usage for that team last year. So maybe the market was a bit tepid. The offense wasn't good. Then they lose, one of their best players, if not the best player. But I actually don't mind that. Zach Evans ended up going to Mississippi, signed with Lane Kiffin in the transfer portal. Zach Evans is a very good fit for that system. Mostly because Lane Kiffin knew that he's not a third down back, and he signed Ulysses Bentley from SMU to be the air back, the receiving back for that team. TCU now, that's all they want. They want the receiving running back. Miller, the guy who was, back and forth with Evans last year and on a per touch basis was actually, I think, a little bit better. He's the guy who's going to get all the touches this year. And in this system, like I said, he's a better fit for it. TCU has a metric ton of starters coming back in total. It's something like 18 or 19, like something like that. I'm specifically on defense, that they're bringing back just a ton of guys. The defense is going to be better. It cannot be as bad as it was last, like literally, mathematically, it's not possible. So it is going to be better. And you know that, again, the biggest issue from last year's offense, that it has been addressed as spot on as you could possibly address an issue. I think TCU is going to jump up this year. Thomas, you remember just a second ago when I said USC was tied for the biggest jump for my power ratings from the end of last year to the start of this year? The team they're tied with is TCU.
All right, that makes sense. TCU, you're going with them over Colorado here, at the very least, saying that the point differential is not quite what it should be.
Yeah, TCU for sure. I think TCU blows out Colorado here. And again, I don't think Carl Dorella is going to last the entire fall. I think Colorado is going to go 0-3 in their non-cons because they scheduled unfortunately a tragically hard non-conference schedule, and they're going to go into the Pac-12. It's going to be a rough year for Carl Dorella and Colorado, and I think it starts off against TCU.
Now, Thor, I want to talk about some of these bigger matchups, not necessarily the largest differences, and then I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire before we get to your hammer of the week. But first, let's start off here. A big team taking on a matchup. We've got Colorado State going up against Michigan. Michigan 27.5-point favorites here, and you think that isn't even enough?
Yeah, and this is a lot of these games are fascinating matchups, and it's not just because I'm a college football sicko. This year, again, I go back to it. With the offseason of unprecedented movement, you have these rosters where they're just totally different from last year. And then, there was a lot of the coaching changes as well, more than usual. And so you have these enormous schematic changes going along with the rosters being totally different in a way that we've never seen before in college football, literally college football history. Colorado State is one of those cases. That was a team where the last couple of years it had gone stale under Steve Addazio. Steve Addazio is one of those coaches that, how do I put this? His players don't like him, and the media doesn't like him. Most people that beat Steve Addazio that I've talked to don't seem to like Steve Addazio. And it was like this thing with I talked about this in a previous shows with Randy Edsall at UConn was another one where the roster had started to hate the coach, and just switching it out, you knew that the team's performance and their effort that they were putting in, just by definition, it was going to jump up for the new guy. And we saw that yesterday with Jim Mora, where UConn was playing harder than we'd seen them playing in years. Colorado State now, they go to Jay Norvell, who these last several years has been at Nevada. He brought Nevada, Nevada had sort of descended into the crater. He brought them out of that, and he was, you had that high flying offensive attack, Carson Strong and Romeo Dubes and Cole Turner and that whole thing. The air raid, he's another air raid guy. He's bringing that to Colorado State. And he brought a ton of guys from Nevada with him, including his quarterback, including either 2 or 3 receivers. And then they weren't all the guys that he brought with him from Nevada. So that team is totally different. When you're thinking about this handicap, you cannot even think about the last couple Colorado State teams that are in your mind, because not only is the personnel super different, the offensive strategy and the defense strategy is super different too. Addazio, you remember, like, before he was at Colorado State, he was at Boston College. He was A.J. Dillon's coach. What he loves to do is just pound the run. It's just pound it. Last year, it was about forcing the ball to Trey McBride, but he was by far the best player that they had. Whereas now you're spreading the field out. You're not going to have all the tight ends that Addazio had, and stuff like that. More playing big slots and then the 3 receivers across the field. So you have that on the one side. Michigan, of course, you lost, especially the edge rushers. That's the big thing. They lost, of course, Hutchinson and Ojabo. So some of the other losses they had, guys that were drafted are more easily replaced. Like Hassan Haskins was an awesome college player, but they should be able to replace him easily enough because you have Blake Corum coming back. He's one of the, certainly one of the nation's most explosive runners, one of the Big Ten's best runners just overall. And then, he's going to platoon with Edwards, and he's really good as well. So they should be able to replace that. What's going to be interesting with them is in the early part of the schedule is watching the way that this quarterback situation plays out. Jim Harbaugh, yesterday or the day before, I forgot what day it was, but he announced something vis-a-vis his quarterback situation that I've never seen in college football. And it's hard to do something where I've never seen it before, but he did. He announced Cade McNamara, who is the incumbent starter. He announced that he will be the week 1 starter. But he did not stop there, because he announced that J.J. McCarthy, who was McNamara's backup last year, that he will be starting in week 2, and that the Wolverines will name their permanent starter in week 3. That they won't just be. It's really weird. It's really, really weird. And, I think that this is – I don't have any inside information on this, but you have to assume that the reason that this is happening is Harbaugh was concerned over the offseason, again, going back to the unprecedented player movement that we were seeing in the transfer portal with the lifting of those restrictions. He had to be just absolutely terrified that J.J. McCarthy was going to walk on him to a place where he could start immediately, where there was going to be no questions asked. He was going to start 12 games this season. And so I think, over the offseason, you're trying to convince McCarthy, like, dude, I know I've said in the past that it'll be an open competition. And I meant it then, but I really mean it now. Like, I mean it even more than I did then. You'll be given a fair shake. All the beat writers say that it was pretty even. Like, McNamara, he's going to give you – basically you go with McNamara for the higher floor. He's going to give you more cost certainty, but he doesn't have the physical tools that McCarthy has. So McCarthy's the guy who raises the ceiling of the offense, potentially at a higher variance. Right. And so that's sort of the interesting decision on that. And Harbaugh, he got what he wanted. Both the quarterbacks stayed. And now you see whoever ends up losing that and is on the bench to start week 3, they're not going to transfer in the middle of the season. So mission accomplished on as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, as far as this game, the live line, Thomas, what was the live line in this one again?
Live line. Well, the line right now sits at 27.5.
27.5. Yeah. And my line on that was, I have Michigan minus 32.3. So, that's one where my numbers are pointing at Michigan as a value, but it's possible that my numbers, because these are based on a lot of results, specifically from last year, the data from last year, certainly have been modulated with returning experience and stuff like that they have not come high enough on Colorado State. But, again, because of all the movement and stuff like that. But I need to see it with them. I need to see Norvell with these new guys, and I need to see the way that passing attack looks. And I also need to see if, for instance, on defense, are the Rams going to give more effort for this new coaching staff than they were giving last year for Adazio? Those are things that I just don't know yet. But they are a team that could tick up in their performance if a couple of these open questions are answered.
Now, another big game coming up this weekend, the official team of Vinny Bag of Donuts, Utah, the Utes, are going up against Florida here. Florida 2.5-point dogs at home in this spot. How the mighty have fallen for me growing up, and I apologize to the listeners of this podcast who might feel old now, but for me growing up was the Urban Meyer, Tim Tebow, absolute powerhouse Florida Gator years. And now all of a sudden the Utes favored in this matchup here. What say you on this one, Thor?
I like Utah a lot. I like Utah a lot. I loved them earlier in the summer when the books the books didn't think they were making a mistake apparently, but they opened Florida as a favorite. And that was a mistake. That was a big mistake. Utah is a legitimate national title contender. I think Utah is going to be in the college football playoff. Florida, they're another interesting team that hated their coach last year, and it wasn't just that they hated Dan Mullen. It was that team was horribly mismanaged, and I won't get into that because people have heard plenty about that on Twitter. If you see every time Dameon Pierce touches the ball or breathes or anything, people are talking about how Dan Mullen just criminally underused him last year, which is true. It's absolutely true. But there was all sorts of Anthony Richardson probably should have been the starter last year as opposed to Emory Jones. Some of those things are going to be corrected just by Billy Napier coming in. You would imagine also that this team is going to get better effort overall. Certainly this team is going to be better coached on offense. I hate to laugh, but man, Todd Grantham should not be in charge of an FBS defense again. Left a lot of guys on islands. Specifically, it was really unfair to Kare Elam. Now you're going to get into a situation where it should be, more back to basics and stuff like that, where you're not going to see your team get ripped for as many long gains and stuff like that. But we still have to see some of it come together. And the other thing is, it's not like Florida has like, the talent on hand where they can be like, like a contender for the SEC. They just don't. Right, like Richardson's a solid collegiate talent. This stuff about him being a top 10 NFL, like I'm sorry to people in the NFL draft industry because a lot of them are my friends, but the idea that he's a top 10 or a top 15 overall NFL draft prospect in the preseason is absolutely ludicrous. The guy's accuracy averse. He's been to this point in his career. He struggles to even tick it up over 50. I do think he's a good fit in Napier's system because Napier makes very good use of his quarterback's legs, even when they are not running, beyond the line of scrimmage. Like you saw this a lot with Levi Lewis at Louisiana Lafayette, where they do a lot of motion stuff, and then they do the play action bootleg stuff. And you're going to see a lot of that with Richardson. And then, if his options aren't open, that's going to open up these possibilities for him to run, and he can rip off some explosive runs. So there's some stuff there, but like Florida's running back room, they have 4 different guys. They can't decide on a running back, mostly because like these guys were like all like high 4 stars, low 5 stars, but none of them, they've all been in college for several years. None of them have differentiated themselves. So I'm not super, bullish on them. I don't love their receiving core. Their offensive line has stunk for the last couple of years. That was the other thing that was maligned. Grantham, and then the other one is the offensive line coach. Mullen tried to save himself by firing both of them early last November, and it didn't work. But we'll have to see if they can fix some of that stuff. But like I said, that's probably going to take a little bit of time. And when you're facing a team that's a legitimate contender to not only make the college football playoff, but potentially to do something there, to win a game, maybe even make the national title game, there's just a discrepancy, with these two teams. Utah, their coach, he's one of the longest tenured coaches in college football. In Whittingham, there's like 1 or 2 guys that have been at their stops longer than him. He has been building towards this moment for a decade plus now. This is the most talented team that he's had at Utah. He's had, there was a team that he had that was undefeated and stuff like that. This team probably won't end up undefeated. They're probably not going to run the table and win the title. But if you put those teams and just stack them up, if those 2 teams played, this team 2020 is winning. They have a really good defense. Again, even though they lost Devin Lloyd, they actually stole a linebacker from Florida that's going to fit right in, this Diabate kid, NFL prospect for sure. They have a very good secondary. They're good up front, well coached on defense. They don't make the mistakes I was talking about with Florida. And then on offense, you have one of the nation's best running backs in Tavion Thomas, who had over 20 touchdowns last year. And then Cam Rising's back. And when they switched the offense from Charlie Brewer at the beginning of last year to Cam Rising, everything changed, right? Because you before you were limited and people could stack the box on you. Once Rising was in there, you couldn't do that anymore. Rising can throw the ball down the field. He can hit the tight ends up the seam, and Utah has 2 good ones, so that they can do all that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is, he doesn't only stretch the defense vertically, he stretches it horizontally because he's a dual threat. He has good legs. So you have to worry about Thomas and then him, on the ground, in addition now to the air game in a way that you didn't with Charlie Brewer, because Charlie Brewer can't throw the ball beyond 20 yards downfield. I really like this Utah team. I think they're going to go in and they're going to beat Florida for sure.
2 teams that definitely were, again, like Florida, powerhouses several years ago, but recently have been a little underwhelming. Florida State and LSU are going at it this weekend as well. LSU 3.5-point favorites here, but you think the Seminoles should be more of a pick 'em?
I do. Yeah. Now this, for informational purposes, this one is going to be one that I'm going to be watching very closely, because it would be hard to know exactly or to feel 100% confident in what your read is on LSU right this second. Obviously the end of the Coach O era was not very good. And then they fired him early so they could get a jump on the coaching search. So the end of last year, it's data that's sort of unusable. And in addition to that, they had injuries to key players last year that changed the way that they played. For instance, on offense, Keishawn Butte last year at this time, you would have bet your life. You would have bet the mortgage. You would have bet your house. You'd have bet everything that Keishawn Butte would have been a first-round pick in April's draft. But he ends up getting injured early for the season, and now he's back. Because he wants to get back up to that. He probably didn't like the what he had heard back from the NFL coming off that injury, how high he'd go. He's a top, if not top 10 overall guy, a top 15 overall guy. In my opinion, he should be in the discussion for best receiver in the nation. Typically, people just say Jackson Smith and Jigba for that and then just move on. I think Boutte, you got to put him right up there. He needs to be in that discussion. So you have that. And then it's going to be interesting to see who Kelly goes with at quarterback, to try to feed him and then the other guys the ball. It's down to the Arizona State transfer, Jaden Daniels, and then sort of the carryover backup and Garrett Nussmeier. Nussmeier is the pocket passer that doesn't have the mobility. Jaden Daniels, he's all mobility, and his throwing game. How do I put it? It's been his pocket game has been the Benjamin Button of college football the last 3 years. His best season was ironically as a true freshman. He got worse as a sophomore, and last year was by far the worst season that he'd had throwing the ball. He had a couple games last year where it was like, put a sheet over the television. It was so bad. They've been working on Daniels' accuracy. They this summer and and stuff like that. They've talked very openly with the media about that, where they're working on his footwork and different. It's a lot of mechanic stuff. You're trying to rebuild Daniels from the ground up. But are you going to go with the dual threat there? We've seen Kelly, there's been times where he's had Ian Book sort of was Buckner, the guy that they had signed before. He's more of a dual threat, or is he going to go more with the pocket passer, sort of like Jack Cohn was, this past year? I do think that LSU is going to be better than they were last year, but Florida State absolutely is going to be better than they were, over the entire course of last season. And we started to see it down the stretch. Like the way that the season started for Florida State last year, I didn't think Norvell was going to make the end of the regular season. They lost that game to the FCS team, and they started 1-3 or 0-4, whatever it was. But then down the stretch, sort of magically, and lo and behold, Jordan Travis, their quarterback, who previously had been like one of these guys who I'm talking about, who was like a dual threat, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Down the stretch, he actually started to make real legitimate progress as a thrower. And the reason that was such a huge deal was Florida State's running attack had already made it. It's just we weren't noticing it because, the offense would devolve into these long periods of inefficiency because the passing game was so bad. But you remember when Mike Norvell was at Memphis, how explosive those running games were, with all the different guys they had, Darrell Henderson and Tony Pollard, and Gibson played more in the slot there. But, they had all these different guys, and the rushing attack was just always super duper explosive. And again, that's already taken off at Florida State. The key thing was getting the quarterback play, being able to pass the ball. Now it looks like they're able to do that. Their defense also took a huge step forward. In 2020, they were just awful. They were an abomination. The first 4 games of last year, they were also awful. But after that, I don't think they gave up more than 30 points in any game in their last 8 games. And, that was a stretch where they went, I think, 5-3 down the stretch. So they are ticking up. There's reasons to think that they will continue to tick up, that this is a progression going forward. This line live, it's LSU minus 3.5, which I understand from a public perception, because Florida State's been down in the dumps for so long. But I think these two teams qualitatively are closer in reality than people do. And I absolutely think that this line should be closer to a pick 'em than it is.
Now, one of the biggest games of the weekend here we'll hit on before we do a little bit of rapid fire, but it doesn't get bigger than this when it comes to the brand names involved. The Ohio State University.
Use that trademark, Thomas. They spent some money on it. You got to use it.
Takes on the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Although apparently Notre Dame, not interestingly enough, the official college of Ireland, they're apparently Nebraska fans. I don't know if you've seen that going around, but apparently in Ireland, when you're a new driver, you have this big N sticker that you put on your car to signal to people that you're a new driver, and it's the exact Nebraska sticker. So whole bunch of Nebraska fans that over there that teams recently found out as they went to Dublin this weekend for a game. But in this one, we got Notre Dame versus Ohio State, laying 17 points with the Buckeyes here. What do you think of this? Are people undervaluing Notre Dame, or is Ohio State very much that far ahead of them?
I think that Ohio State is that far ahead of them. And it's not like I'm super duper low on Notre Dame. My power ratings, they're seventh. I got them seventh in the preseason, so it's not like I'm super duper low on them. But for me, this, at least in the preseason right now, the way that I see it, you're in college football, you have a tier of two teams at the very top, Alabama and Ohio State, and then the second tier is a team under it's Georgia. They're a step down from those top two, but there's no one else that's there. And then I got Clemson a bit below Georgia, and I sort of have Clemson in their own tier. And then you're dropping down to the sort of what becomes then a clump like after that. And Notre Dame is in that clump, like with Michigan, with Utah, who we were just talking about, with A&M, a couple of different teams like that. Ohio State, they of course they lost the 2 first-round receivers, so you have that, but you have, arguably the nation's best quarterback. If he's not, he's number 2, Bryce Young and Stroud. We're not going to get into that argument right now. You also have, it's the same thing at running back, either the nation's best or I would call him the second, and Travion Henderson. I prefer Bijan a bit, but like Travion, absolute monster talent. So your backfield is amazing, and your receiving core is going to remain amazing, because even though you lost the 2 first rounders, Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back, who arguably is the best receiver in the nation, if not one of the top 2. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., now the 5-star who's been waiting his turn. He's going to get a starting job. He's going to do, he's probably going to go over 1,000 yards in his first year. And then you have a couple other 5-stars that you can decide on for the third job, whether that's Julian Fleming or whether that's Egbuka, right? And they got guys beyond that too. So like they're doing just fine there. Their offensive line looks good. And where that team can improve this year, they're just hoping, like, their offense is already awesome and it should remain awesome. Where they could improve a bit, and they're going to have to beat Alabama. Like, again, I think those two teams are in a neighborhood of their own. But for Ohio State to be able to do that this year, the defense has to be better, and they knew it did, right? That's why they went out and they hired the Oklahoma State defensive coordinator. They've gone in there, and I was talking about the quotes that we were getting from the USC defensive coaches that were a little bit tepid. It's been sort of the opposite at Ohio State. And again, it's an interpretation thing where I don't know if it's bluster or if it's real. But like, they really think that they're going to have a top 10 defense this year, or maybe even a top 5. Like, they are dreaming high. They certainly have a ton of talent there, but we have seen that defense struggle in some big spots these past couple of years. The one that jumps to mind from last fall was when they were playing Michigan, and I mentioned Hassan Haskins earlier, and he cut through them like a hot knife through butter last year. So they're going to have to fortify that front seven for sure. But I just think that they have too many weapons for Notre Dame in this game. With Notre Dame, it's the first game of the Marcus Freeman era. Of course, he's a holdover, and most of the staff that they retain most of the staff. So you lost Brian Kelly, but you're keeping most of them. But Freeman's in this spot for the first time in his life. I'd be surprised if right away it's exactly what he's going to become as a head coach. And then you have a new starting quarterback, and stuff like Buckner's. You're going to have to work him in. Buckner's the guy that he had platooned in behind Jack Cohn last year. They really need him to be like a star, like, this coming season. And then that's how they could potentially be a playoff contender. But I don't see them competing with Ohio State in this game. My line on this one is Ohio State minus 19.7.
Now, Thor, let's hit on some rapid fire here before we finish off with the hammer of the week. I'm going to give you 5 games here that you have some of your biggest discrepancies on. I just want you to hit on them real quick, minute or less. We're going to start off Middle Tennessee versus James Madison. James Madison's laying 6.5 right now. You think it should be 0.5 point?
I do, yeah. I think that one should be closer to a pick 'em. James Madison, last year, these past couple of years, we had 130 FBS teams. Now we have 131. James Madison, is a team that's coming up to the FBS this year. The books are shockingly bullish on James Madison this year. Going back to the win total thing, James Madison is only playing 11 games this regular season because they're on, what do you call it? Not probationary is not the right word. Like, for 1 year, you have to, what's the word?
I would say probationary is probably the right term.
Oh, okay. Well, so they're on that for a year. They got like the FBS training wheels on for a year. So they're only playing 11 regular season games, and yet their win total is set at 6.5. which really caught my eye because and now they were a power at the FCS, but in previous years, the powers that have come up, they have not started that quickly. Like Appalachian State, Georgia Southern, some of those different teams that we've seen come up, they have not been as strong in year one. Middle Tennessee is a team that has a lot of guys back. They have their quarterback back. They have a ton of their receivers back. This year, they're going to more of a true air raid system. I think that suits what they have coming back. I think that game should be a pick 'em. I view it as a coin flip. I like Middle Tennessee.
Troy versus Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 22.5-point favorites.
Yeah, that one is it's fascinating to see if is Jared Dagey going to be starting on Troy. Jared Dagey had this just crazy offseason where he started at West Virginia. It didn't seem like West Virginia wanted him back. He transferred to Western Kentucky to take over for Bailey Zappi and was told 10 days ago that he was not going to win that starting job. He lost it to this kid who had come up from D2. So then he transfers down to Troy, but there's a very short turnaround here. Although Troy was the school that Neil Brown, the West Virginia coach, had come from previously. So it's schematically, it should be stuff that he is at least familiar with, but we'll see if that's a quick enough turnaround time where he's going to be able to start right away. And then as far as Ole Miss, the whole team is it's one of those things where a lot of the team was remade because the portal king, Lane Kiffin, signed everybody. Jackson Dart was an awesome signing from USC. I talked about the backs before. There's a lot of on both sides. You're going to have a much different thing. My adjusted line on that is minus 17.3. I think this is a similar thing where some of the excitement that was generated by Lane Kiffin over the offseason, it might be leading to a bit of an objective tax that you're going to have to pay if you want to bet on Mississippi.
Maryland versus Buffalo. Maryland, same thing, 22.5-point favorites. You think it should be 17.3?
Yeah, I think that one should probably be a little bit lower. People are excited about Maryland this year. They have Tagovailoa, Tua's brother is coming back at quarterback, and they have a really nasty receiver room where they're going to have 3 or 4 of those kids get drafted into the NFL. So you have that stuff going for them, and that's great. Their passing attack is going to be very good. I still need to see them put forth a rushing attack to complement that I'm confident in. And then the other thing is that the defense is just, going, that's the one thing that Loxley needs to fix. Buffalo, they're going to try to shorten the game, establish the run. It's what they've done since Leopold. It's what they're still doing now. So to get over this 22.5 number against a Maryland team that's not a juggernaut by any means, does Maryland get enough possessions in this game to have an opportunity to do that would be my biggest question.
Reno takes on Texas State and the Wolfpack minus 4.5 in this one.
Yeah, Nevada. Last I was watching Nevada and New Mexico State, and that was Nevada did win that game. They were as much given it as they won. New Mexico State started quarterback Diego Pavia, who was he was a JUCO, previously. He turned the ball over 4 times in the first half, and I thought he was going to get yanked at that point. Jerry Kill decided not to pull the plug on him, and he threw another interception immediately coming out of halftime. So then they pulled the plug on him. But that's probably not your referendum game on this new look Nevada team. We were talking before about how Jay Norvell had gone from Nevada to Colorado State, and then Nevada was just a crater. They're starting Illinsworth at quarterback. Nevada is a kid who had come over from Oklahoma State. He looked okay-ish against New Mexico State, but New Mexico State is one of the 2 worst teams in the FBS. And after what I saw in the last game, I actually ticked them down to be in 131, the lowest team on the totem pole. So again, don't jump too high over yourself over that one. I think maybe that's a part of that explains this line, both the fact that Nevada won on the road in the opener, and then also people's memories of those teams going back a couple years. I think that explains sort of a tax on Nevada. But yeah, my numbers are saying that Texas State should probably be the extremely slight favorite. My numbers favor Texas State by 0.6 points. So I see this one as a coin flip, and I'll probably have money on Texas State.
The next one up here, last one in our rapid fire, Cincinnati, the former playoff contenders, going up against the Arkansas Razorbacks here. Razorbacks laying 5.5. Yeah,
the market might be overreacting a bit to Cincinnati lost, between Desmond Ridder, Jerome Ford, Alec Pierce, the guys that they lost on defense. Obviously, last year, it was a historic season with the college football playoff and everything. But I think that there's this thought that they caught, Luke Fickell caught lightning in a bottle, and now you lose all these studs, and now they're just going to revert back to being, like a good G5 team, but maybe not being a really, really, really awesome G5 team. I think they're still a really, really awesome G5 team. The quarterback, they should be able to, maybe you're not going to get a guy as good as Ridder, but Ben Bryant was a really solid starter for Eastern Michigan last year. The other kid that he's competing with in camp was a solid 4-star recruit. They also got a local kid he had signed with LSU coming out of high school, this Corey Kiner kid at running back to help replace Jerome Ford. They have 2 different running backs named Montgomery who have been on the depth chart. That they like both of them, so that they're going to have a sort of stable of backs. And I think the defense is going to remain really, really solid. It always is under Fickell, and they still have plenty of guys on there. My line on this is much, much closer. It's another one where my system sees this game as more of a pick 'em, whereas Vegas, or the market, I suppose more accurately stated, is they're making a call on which side they like. My line on this game is Arkansas -1.
All right, it is time now. Thor's hammer of the week. We've saved the best for last. What is your favorite play on the slate this week?
Yeah, I mean, looking over the early lines that we have right now, it's Pittsburgh, playing against West Virginia in their annual rivalry game. And you have a couple different things going on here where with West Virginia is hanging a lot of their hopes and dreams, and Neil Brown is almost hanging his continued employment upon the idea that JT Daniels can be what people were dreaming on him being several years ago at USC. And now, since then, there's been several injuries. He was run out of USC. He outright lost the starting job at Georgia. We have not seen him on the field much these past couple years. Now you bring him in here, and you're sort of Neil Brown. It seems like he sort of expecting, or he needs JT Daniels to help save his job. I think that they're going to have problems there. The running game, I'm not sure what they're going to get there either. They had signed Lynn J. Dixon in the transfer portal from Clemson. Dixon left. They're going to start this kid named Tony Mathis, but I don't think they have a lot of backfield depth either. I don't love their defense either. So, like, for me, West Virginia is more like a team that's going to finish like 4-8 than maybe what the common perception is. Whereas with Pittsburgh, I think the market is expecting them to fall way off after all the losses they had over the offseason. And that's in a lot of ways understandable. You lose the only the only quarterback that was taken in the first 2 rounds in Kenny Pickett. You lose the Biletnikoff winner in Jordan Addison. They lost other guys in addition to that, but those are 2 just mega, mega losses. And then you also lost your offensive coordinator, the architect of it, in Mark Whipple, and then sort of the co-architect of it in their wide receiver coach, Brennan Marion. So you have all those losses. I understand why the market might be a little bit down on them. I certainly believe that Pittsburgh is going to take a step back, a slight step back this year, but not nearly as much as the market seems to be anticipating. The reason why is they bring in Keaton Slovis. I don't think Slovis is as big of a drop-off from Kenny Pickett as is commonly believed. Slovis was a kid a couple of years ago who was great at USC, and he's someone whose skill set is very conducive to what Pittsburgh does, where it's like the quick hitting stuff where, sideline to sideline, and then you sort of keep stretching the defense out intermediate, and now we're going deep and stuff like that. Slovis can definitely do that. And the guy they brought in to try to replace Addison, it's not going to be a 1-for-1, but I don't think it's going to drop off as much as people think, is Kanata Mumfield from Akron, who finished, this is according to PFF, in the 97th percentile last year in terms of separation gained against man coverage. So you have that going on. The passing game will go down a little bit, but again, maybe not as much as people think. But then you look at some of the other metrics, the running game is certainly going to go up. They had a deep backfield last year. All those guys are back. They go 3-4 deep in the backfield. So they're going to be running the ball more this year. They should be running it more effectively. And Narduzzi wanted to do that anyway. That was part of the reason I think why Whipple left. The other thing is their defense is probably going to be better. They have 7 defenders back this year. Last year, they were very good at specific things. Havoc was one of them. I think they finished number 2 in the nation in sacks per game. Now with all these defenders defenders back, you're hoping that you can improve the efficiency a little bit. And I think that they'll be able to do that. So you're going to go down a little bit in the passing attack. You're going to go up with the rush. You're going to go up in the defense. Hopefully it's around to, just a slight step back overall, because you're losing that trump card of your passing attack. And then in this matchup, again, going back to how we started off the show, you're just looking for value. And generally that comes when your perception of one team, it's way off from the market. And then on the other side as well, when it can start to accelerate. And that's what it is with this one. I'm lower on West Virginia than the market, probably a bit higher on Pittsburgh than the market is. This line live right now is -7.5. My line on this one is Pittsburgh -17.8. So I have an overlay of over 10 points. And by the way, if you look at some of the betting data out there publicly right now, it seems like the Sharps these past couple of weeks in this month leading up to the season, that they've been hitting Pittsburgh on this line as well. So I'm not sure that line is going to stay at Pittsburgh -7.5. I think you're probably going to see it closer to 10 by kick.
Well, thank you so much, Thor, for all of the valuable insight today. Again, guys, we are going to be back at it every week of the college football season, every Sunday. Show's probably going to drop on Monday, so watch out for it early in the week to start your week off and get the idea of what the college football landscape for the weekend is going to look like, what you should be betting on, get a head start attacking those lines early. Thor, where can they find all of the awesome work you're doing throughout the college football season?
You can find me on Twitter at Thorku, Thorku, and you can find my work on Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Once again, you know the drill. Follow at Betting Pros on the Twitter. And, of course, give us that 5-star review. If you like us, tell your friends. Seriously, subscribe, and share. You know how it goes. Thor, thank you so much for joining us today. And, guys, best of luck all week. Let's cash those tickets.